Cool. Yeah, thanks to everyone who came out. And I mean, obviously, just thanks to everyone who bought a ticket, honestly. Even if they didn't come, we still benefit, so fuck it. Yeah, this tune that me and Ben, I guess Ben had started it earlier this year, and then I went and stayed at his house in Spain and then kind of started messing with it as well. And then we added more people to it. But the concept that I want to go over in this track is what I call a mud pie. And if you've heard me talk about that already in like other videos online, well then, sorry about hearing it again, I suppose. But I'm sure Ben will have like some interesting stuff to add to the conversation anyway. But basically the point of this whole thing is that like, I feel like everyone can make a beat, right? Like everyone can make a beat that sounds like this. Yeah. Hold on. It's like the simplest thing ever. Like anyone can go on Splice, download a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, and make a sub patch with a sine wave. Build that by watching a 10-minute tutorial on the internet, right? But when you add in all this other stuff, oh, is this working now? Okay, I'm gonna switch mic. Nice. Cool. Test. All right, this is way better. So, like I said, anyone can sort of do this simple stuff. But then what makes a song interesting, especially in the electronic music world when you're doing this like weird banger type stuff, is pretty much all the sound design and the editing and stuff. That's kind of what keeps interest. And sometimes a riff, a riff can be nice too. But generally I find the most interesting thing about these kind of beats to be the sound design. So this is what the beat sounds like with no sound design. Simplest thing ever. And then this is what it sounds like with all the sound design. It's literally the exact same thing with just a shitload of sound design on top of it. It's like a kick, snare, and a sub, basically, and then tons of stuff. So this is all the stuff that was just omitted in the first place. So now we're going to talk about how to make that, because it seems pretty complicated, right? Like if you listen to it, there's a lot of stuff going on. You're like, wow, there's like 2 million sounds a second. How did that happen? But it's actually quite simple. It's not difficult at all. And you can kind of like front load a lot of the work by making what's called a mud pie. So pretty much what a mud pie is it's just a long file of sound design. So for instance, I believe either Woolg or Ben made this mud pie. And it's just a long file that sounds like this. Prepare your anus. It is. It's just a bunch of noise, basically. But then with careful editing and interesting effects and stuff like that, you can sort of chop all of that up to make a riff, right? So the resulting thing of like the resulting edited parts of that would sound like this. So that's the concept, pretty simple. So then now I'll just go over, I guess, a quick like live demonstration of what that might look like. So to make a mud pie, let's just start off with any piece of content. So maybe let's just start off with the actual fully mastered track. That's a great place to start. And let's just stretch it a lot. So we get something like this now. Bunch of weird bass noise. We change the warping mode, say to like texture or something, you can get some granular type stuff going. And then let's just add some effects, like maybe a phaser, maybe some OTT for whatever reason. Maybe some auto filter, something like that. And let's put some LFOs on this. And I don't know, maybe some compression. Pretty much at this point, I'll just start layering whatever. Doesn't really. That sounds pretty good. So now what I'll do is set up another channel. So I have the one channel that's like stretched and all fucked up and got like a bunch of shit on it. And then I'll set up another channel to record into from that first channel. So now what I'll do is just set my input here to 29 in, and then I'll hit record on that channel, start recording, and then I'll just start playing with things on the channel, like the grain size of the warp mode and just, you know, stuff on the effects and whatnot, and we'll get something like this. So you can do that for however long you want. You could do it for 10 minutes or 10 seconds, doesn't matter. But then pretty much the resulting thing you have, this, the thing we just recorded, is what I would call the mudpie. And then from there you can edit that into the song. So let's take that up into the loop that we just had. So we have this mudpie loop over here. And let's drag this audio over to here. And now let's just start cutting stuff from that loop into the song. So, I mean, I'm pretty happy with where all the hits are already, so what I'll do just to demonstrate is just omit some of these hits and just replace them with new ones. So currently, this section of the editing sounds like this. Maybe let's delete or just mute those by pressing 0, and then just put this section of the mudpie right there. And then maybe use the transposition to get it in key. And you always want to cut your lows on stuff like this, because that way it doesn't like overlap with the sub and whatnot. Okay, so now you get something like this. And then let's do the same thing again over here on the same beat, basically. So let's get rid of this one, and now just put this hit over here. Maybe we could pitch this up and it might sound more interesting. Yeah, it's kind of squelchy. No, let's make the first drop a meta drop. Yeah, I mean we could do it on a second drop. Well, we could also just like, you know, save as and be like possible second drop. And then later on, if we're like, oh man, this drop's so good, then just like pull all this shit out and like paste it onto the next one or whatever. Oh, that's sweet too. Cool. That's pretty much the concept. Any questions? It's pretty simple. I mean, yeah, it's really not a difficult concept, but it's like you can go pretty far with it in some certain ways. Like, for instance, the way in which you use the mudpie, there's a bunch of interesting things you can do with that, for instance. So here's one thing I like to do a lot, is I'll put this into a sampler. So if we search sampler here, load this up, and then just drop our mudpie into said sampler. There's certain tricks that you can do in here that you can't really do very easily if it's just in audio. Let's put this on not playback. Yeah, let's see, is that gonna work? Wait, what's going on? Oh no, my MIDI has ceased to exist. Oh, that's a thing that happens when you plug into a mixer. It messes your MIDI up. All right, so let's just write the MIDI in this way.
In Sampler, you can FM a sample, you can AM a sample, and one of my favorite things to do is a really good pitch drop. Because if you really want it to sound like you're stopping a turntable, it's not necessarily the same thing as going into the warp mode and bringing the yeah, there you go. The pitch envelope alone is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's pretty nice. So one thing that I like to do is put an arpeggiator before the sampler, and then that'll just like, you know, take whatever MIDI is going into the arpeggiator and just repeat it a ton of times. That'll sound like this. Which in itself is already kind of cool because it makes it musical, right? It makes it rhythmic.
You could also like control the index of where the sample is. That might be a fun one for like.
Yeah, that's what I was getting to. You ruined the secret.
Ruined the drop.
What you can do is you can set MIDI to attach to all different sorts of stuff. So what I like to do is attach velocity to the sample offset or the loop start point. And then pretty much what you can do then is put the velocity MIDI plugin after the arpeggiator and turn the randomization up. And then every MIDI note that goes through the arpeggiator, like it repeats itself by a 16th note, hits the velocity plugin, sets it to a random velocity, and then the random velocity is said to set the start point to a different place. So then you get something like this. Actually, I think this needs to be set to sample offset. Yeah, now you can just see the play headers like jumping around everywhere. I don't know if you can see that. It's pretty sick. And you can also set the velocity to control two things. So we could also say, let's control the pitch as well. So now...
Instant IDM.
Well, yeah, essentially now what it is a granulizer, pretty much. So from here, you could like almost get yourself into another mudpie if you wanted to.
The gate is a fun option there, and also going out of sync is something I do a lot. Going out of there, you can do like 10 milliseconds.
Tight. That would be cool with an all-pass filter.
Like
so there's this cool thing called an all-pass filter. Disperser makes one, and this basically makes stuff sound really squishy, like this. You kind of hear how it like adds that weird squishy low end to stuff. But if you don't want to spend $69 on a plugin, you can abuse phase offset in EQ3 because it's so bad, and you can duplicate EQ3 5 times without it even doing anything, and it makes disperser happen. It's the same effect. And the reason why this happens is because of how an EQ works. So like, let's say you want to remove 100 hertz from a signal, right? It takes 100 hertz from the signal running through it, runs it back through itself, and puts it out of phase by however many decibels you want. So like, let's say you wanted to remove 3 decibels of 100 hertz. It would take 3 decibels of 100 hertz, run it back in out of phase. And because of these splits and this like phase shit that it's doing, it's putting like every band that it's splitting at out of phase. And because EQ3 only splits at 3 points, it pretty much does exactly what disperser does. It just like puts the lows out of phase with the highs. And by duplicating it a few times, you kind of like, you know, just that phase issue that it has just propagates 5 times more than it normally would, and it equals an all-pass filter. If we do it like 10 times, you get something like this. Super wet sounding. And then obviously OTT it, because that's normal. Sounds sick.
You know, Bill, one thing I really like about your mudpies that I also just love about your sound design that makes you, I think, that just sound really crisp, because I've been watching Bill for a long time, is you have really good control over your dynamics. Really early in the sound design phase, I'm always seeing Bill put things like OTT and things that make the dynamics really predictable. Not just not just with the compressor, but with all the frequency bands. And so if you can create like that signal flow that will always result in nice even mix out the other end, you don't need to worry about as much stuff later.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's sort of like when you go into Splice or whatever, all the samples are already like massively processed. So you just put them in your song and they're kind of ready to go. You don't have to do that much. If anything, you have to just remove some shit with an EQ or something like that, or just turn it down a lot. And that's kind of how I try to think about the mudpies thing for sure. I try to make it like almost be the exact end resulting sound that I would want to use in a song without having to do anything more to it. So for instance, if we record this one now and start messing around with it. So let's hit record here and maybe just loop this.
I love it.
All right, so we have a bunch of weird shit.
See, even just like 1 second of that at the right spot might be just absolutely amazing.
Right, like I think actually on the 1, it could be super cool. So if we omit whatever was happening now on the 1, like this, and then omit this, we get this. And then let's just like cut random bits on the 1 here, and then remove the other stuff, and just see what happens. I'm not even like searching for parts of the file at this point. I'm just clicking and seeing what happens. So let's have a listen. could even use it as a layer, really, to the original sound that we had. So this was the original sound we had. But it doesn't really have, I mean, it has pretty nice highs, but I think these bubbly things would probably sound a bit better. So if we put an EQ on the old sound, and then just get rid of the highs, like this. And then with this sound, we just layer just the highs. So this stuff, just the really textural stuff. Let's pick a different part of the file. Now we got this. So you kind of have like this weird bubbly top end now with this fat, thick like mid bass. So yeah, that's another thing you can do is once you start getting right into the mudpie things, you can go down this rabbit hole of like layering and stuff too, which can get pretty insane. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the concept.
I once really liked a time that you described frequency layering as almost like you look at the whole spectrum and you just think about how to colorfully fill it up. And this is kind of the concept when you're doing frequency-based layering. I like to call it a composite. You're making one sound out of maybe many sounds. The easiest example I can think of is in dubstep when they got like the sub bass and then the mid-range and top end wah, wah, wah on top of that. But I mean, this is this exact same concept. You're kind of layering different frequencies just by simply finding something tasty for the top end and convincingly layering it over something that fills in the rest. And I love this as a mind trick tool. If I can fool you into thinking that you're hearing just one snare, but it's actually three things. You're hearing just one womp, but it's a different top and a different bottom. That is one of the main Jedi mind tricks in sound design. We use texturizer to do stuff like that. We use like sampler and groups and different layers containing different effects. The concept remains the same though. How do you color each range in an interesting and cohesive way?
Yeah, another thing I used to do that quite a lot is fades, like fading things together, especially with snares, for instance, because you kind of want like your noise layer to be like really specifically, like have a really specific envelope over the top of your fundamental and stuff like that. But yeah, so for instance with this, you know, you could really carefully shape both of these to make it sound like it's one thing. And then also processing stuff together, like bussing things together and then OTTing them together. This is the magic trick. Yeah, something like that.
Any questions about this set so far?
Hey, Bill, how did you put the original source content together for that mudpie? What was that?
That was probably Ben.
Yeah, that was actually how the tune started. That mudpie came to us from Woolg, who, if you guys don't know, it's like spelling the word wood. Actually, he's on Mr. Bill's new IDM EP, which I highly recommend you check out. That's my favorite track on there, actually, the one with Woolg. He's one of my favorite sound designers, and more people should know about him because he makes these amazing granular mud pies in Fruity Loops. And this was just one of like, you know, several ideas he had sketched out. And I instantly, when I heard that Insanity, I was like, all right, this could go two ways. This is either a Richard Devine, like weird IDM track, or we could try putting a beat over it. So originally I put it over a beat, and it was a lot more kind of random. I was just like taking my favorite parts and putting it over. And I remember Bill latched onto it instantly. It was like, no, simplify it a bit, make it go and just take that part and kind of loop it. So it went through a simplification process for a while, and then we banged out a lot of it when he was visiting me in Valencia, Spain.
Well, I think like when you originally showed this to me, this sound here only happened one time in the whole song. The boom, like that main sound. And I was like, no, that has to be the main sound. Like, just keep doing it. Because if you keep doing it, humans are dumb and they like things that are familiar. You know, everyone likes familiarity, right? That's why pop music is popular, because like you hear it on the TV and then you hear it in the car and then you hear it at the store and then you're like, oh, I feel comfortable with this now. This is fine.
But I love how you pick that sound out because, I mean, I think, Bill, that you're a master of making fast decisions because you hear something, you're like, I like it, let's roll with it. No doubt, no hesitation, and you do that not by really, I mean, for me, when I do that, I'm not listening with my ears as much as I am with my emotions. There's like a really basic little gerbil inside my brain, and when it hears something that's like, yes, I mean, it kind of pulls a little flag, and I have to figure out what that means and do I make it a feature of the track? You have to listen to your music on a visceral, emotional level rather than trying to sound like something, rather than maybe we open this up trying to make a rhythm track and we just went this other direction, you know? You have to go down those wormholes when you feel something pulling you in a direction.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Speaking of rhythm, I figured out a pretty cool little rhythm yoink the other day.
The second part of this, right?
What's that?
The second part of the drop?
Oh, yeah. Well, I was just watching a Squanto tutorial the other day,
nice.
and he had like this cool trick that I was going to share. But yeah, the second part of this drop is like a switch, which has a serum patch in it for sure. So the first one is, they're pretty simple serum patches, to be honest. It's just a little bit of FM and then some like filtering and then some distortion and widening. I think most of the special sauce from that comes from disperser and OGT after it, which is what makes it sound squishy, which is the all-pass filtering thing that we just talked about, which you can do with 5 EQ3s if you don't want to buy disperser. And then the second patch is just a more textural, less textural patch, has more of a fundamental to it. And it's the same thing. It's pretty much the exact same patch, I think, just with some slightly different modulation. And then if you layer them together, you kind of get like the fundamental and the texture plus like the other squishy stuff. And then the second patch is pretty much the same thing, but you just have this LFO that's stepping through like the sync rate amount on the oscillator. So it kind of has that like stepping effect or whatever, which sounds pretty cool. But yeah, the Harmor thing is pretty neat. This new bass thing that I learned from Squanto.
This was in Fruity Loops, right?
Yeah, so this was a Fruity Loop synth originally, but now it is available in all DAWs, I believe. It has been for a while, I think. It's called Harmor.
Harmor.
Yeah, so it's an additive synthesizer, which means that instead of just producing you with like a sample of a saw wave or whatever and then subtracting from that, it produces everything it does by just adding more sine waves. So you have this, basically up the top left, you have the ability to select between whatever waveform you want. So I'm just going to select a square or a saw, it doesn't really matter. That's a saw, that's a square, obviously. And then you have this thing, this phaser, which has this mode called condom. And it's kind of sick. Here, I'll show you some stuff. It kind of makes it sound like that, and then you mess with the offset. You get some interesting stuff there. And then let's mess with the phaser offset with an envelope here. So this is just like the envelope in Serum, but it's in Harmor. And let's make this, I don't know, just whatever, something like this. And then if you go into the effects section, just add some distortion. So let's get something like this.
Oh yeah, that's a Z sound.
Yeah, so once you start messing with the width and stuff of the phaser, it does some weird stuff that I've never really heard many phasers do. But yeah, it's a really good starting point for rhythm yoinks. Just when you said rhythm, I was like, oh yeah, nice. But yeah, rhythm is like almost all about the post-processing, right? So like pretty much if you want to make rhythm yoinks, just take any sound and then give it a really fast and hard envelope, like, and then compress the shit out of it and put delays on it, so like this. So add a bunch of these. And you kind of get those like tonal sort of yoinks happening. Then if you just, it's almost a rhythm yoink. Just needs more noise, so then you just add erosion, right?
Man, I've been using Texturizer since you got me into it. It's been
Oh yeah, this plugin is awesome. Oh, I don't have it, damn it, fuck. Yeah, there's a plugin called Texture. It's basically like erosion, but instead of adding noise to the signal, it can add just any sample, which is pretty cool. Yeah, it's a pretty dank rhythm sound. Tight. All right. Any questions? Yeah.
mudpie creation.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have different approaches, and your workflow really is what makes the difference between getting what you want out. And would you say a lot of times it makes more sense to create something all as one whole clip, and then you take what you like from it, versus a lot of people I think kind of make a bunch of discrete sounds, and like, okay, it's like library of like, here's a bunch of these womp womp sounds, here's these womp womp sounds, and then try to assemble those together.
So the point of the mudpie is to sort of like just do it all faster. Because if you just make each sound like one by one, like for instance, it just took me like however long, 2 minutes to make this sound. Whereas with a mudpie, it's like I could make 50 versions of that sound in like a minute. So, and then I would just have the ability to just pick from them and choose from them. And honestly, I think like a lot of the time when you're going through a sample pack and you're actually clicking through a lot of these discrete sounds, I personally think a lot of the time they came from mudpies, and the person has just edited them nicely and just served them up to you with different names and shit.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of making mudpies is that, if you cut a whole bunch from one file or one session, one time you sat down in front of speakers and really put in the effort to like make a cool sound, if you all cut from that same source, it's all cohesive. It's like they have a common ancestor, all of these little pieces of sounds. I like to start with like a really cool sound and then save it and then change it a bunch and then save it and then change it a bunch, and then I have a whole bunch of presets that all have a matching timbre, and even if like one's a laser and the other's a womp, it kind of came from the same session, so they work together well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yep.
When you're looking at these mudpies and you're considering what the source content could be, are you really focusing on like already like WBassy kind of music, like that source, or could you use like anything and get some pretty crazy results out of it?
Yeah, you could use anything. I mean, like sometimes I'll start from like a sample, sometimes I'll start from a synth, and it's like pretty rare, or it depends. Like, obviously if I'm like, I want to make a banger today, then I'm going to make like a more distorted, more compressed type of mudpie. And then if I make like a glitchy, weird tune, I might make something just more delicate and granular or something.
Could I get the same results, like taking a classic rock song and doing the same concept with it? Would I get some of the same crazy tones that you're getting out of that
I think
source
the
content?
equivalent in classic rock would be if you just sat at your computer and played riffs for like a day, and then the next day you came in and just started cutting bits of riffs together to make a different riff. I think that's probably what the equivalent would be. But I mean, sure, you could do sound design in classic rock, I think. I'm pretty sure that would work.
Yeah, I mean, you could take the classic rock and run it through like a crazy granulator. A lot of the time, my best mudpies are not on Ableton, but I've just got like a little Euro rack rig. And one artist that I've been loving lately that's non-bass music is Max Cooper. Max Cooper tends to basically jam on kind of granular Eurorack sort of modules. And Eurorack is like, 50% magic. You don't really know what's going to come out the other side, and you just hit the record and you hope that it's good. And if you do like a 15-minute jam, and even if you do like 10 minutes and you only harvest 30 great seconds out of it, it was worth it, And sometimes they're really soulful that way because it's like a moment that you captured, and then you take that on. A lot of my favorite stuff comes out of kind of putting my hands on something, capturing it, and later on sorting through it and finding the good stuff.
Yeah, I pretty much do the same. Like I'll get a lot of mudpies from modular stuff, and a lot just from random sampling and stretching stuff and whatnot. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, another question? Yeah, here.
So, just generally speaking, how much time would you say you divide between making mud pies and actually, mixing the song? Is it?
Mixing, like as in doing the mix down.
Yeah, no, yeah. I mean, do you spend most of your time doing the mud pies, and then it's
I spend like
quick after
50.
that, or?
I would say I spend like 50% of the time writing the entire song, and then 50% of the time doing the mix down. Like that's how much time I spend on mix downs, I would say.
Okay. Cool.
Which is annoying. I hate it, and I wish I could just pay someone to do it, but.
Yeah, cool.
But I would say like in the actual writing process, between actually writing music and actually doing sound design, if you consider mudpieing sound design, which I would say I probably do probably like 10% sound design and 90% writing, if you consider editing writing. Because there's a lot of like dealing with the mudpie thing is just editing it, right? Like cutting the right bit out at the right time and putting it in the right place, doing the right fade on it and layering it with the other correct thing and all that sort of stuff. And that, I would say, takes way longer than actually just twisting some knobs and hitting the record button. That's kind of like the quick part, and that's the fun part. Well, one of the fun parts, I suppose.
Is there a reason that you use groups within groups for everything? Is that just a creative thing, or?
Oh, not for everything. So I have, this is my 2-group setup. Actually, I don't know why everything's in this one big group. This is sort of like my 2-group setup. Generally, I won't have like these other things. I just have them there for other reasons. But yeah, so this is my crazy good mix template. It's comprised of drums and everything else. And and everything else gets MIDI sidechained to the drums. So every time something in the everything group happens and the kick and snare happens in the drum group, it just turns everything else off. So that looks like this.
I mean, I really like about your approach, Bill. You make really complicated music, but I think that you're able to do that because you take some things and just make it really, really simple. You just say, listen, I'm just going to have a whole group for everything not drums, and the kick and the snare is going to sidechain it.
I honestly think that people make music way too fucking complicated. Like some people come into my studio and like, man, did you see this thing where you can like load a sample into the Serum wavetable and then like scrub through the Serum wavetable to like recreate the sample in like, now it's resynthesized technically in Serum. I'm like, yeah, but you could just throw the sample in too. Like, why wouldn't you just do that? Yeah. Who knows?
It's interesting, though, to think that keeping it simple is a key to getting complex. I think that if you come at it with too complex of thinking I need to be complex, then it ends up not really evolving very fast because a lot of things that you've set up might not be set up in the most fluid way to get to just the next thing really quickly. And that's something I've actually learned from just working with Bill, is that so many things in your sets are like, let's do this quickly, let's do it efficiently and simply so we can get on to the creative and fun stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the more you like take away the technical layers, the more because I mean you only have so much like processing power in your brain, right? And if you use all of that up doing stupid shit like resampling a sample that you could just drop in, then you're not then there's extra power there that you could be using to actually write songs and good music that's being used on something technical and silly that could just be saved into a rack or just some shit like this where you can just sidechain everything to your drums and it's fine.
I have another question. It's kind of for both of you. How do you decide that a song is done? How do you know the arrangement is finished?
Oh yeah. So I have a good analogy for this. Actually, no, I won't say the analogy. Instead, I'll just I don't know. I just literally what happens is I just get sick of working on it, and and then I shift my entire worldview around the song to accept it as being finished. That's pretty much what happens.
Which one of your albums had that quote on it, which is, art is never finished, only abandoned?
Oh, the Settling for Mediocrity one.
Yeah, Settling for Mediocrity.
Yeah.
I think that album is a response properly to that because you could obsess your whole life over just a song. At some point, you have to be okay with where it's at. I mean, I think that music is decisions. I mean, listen to any track by any artist, and like someone had to be, what kick drum do I use? How loud is it? Which synthesizer? What are the chords? Thousands of decisions go into each track. The only thing that stops you from finishing a track is not making decisions. In my biggest track, Energy, which Bass Sectors still plays every now and then, I went through 3 different drops before getting to that drop. And does that mean in the midst of it, was I a failure? No, I had to go through doing the wrong things until I found that secret recipe. So the only mind killer is not making a decision. So if you want to improve your workflow, the best thing that you can do is optimize the speed and efficiency of the decision making itself. And eventually it'll come to a point where you're like, well, that's the last decision I've made.
Yeah, like for instance, I just put an EP out like last week, and proceeding up to that, I was mixing it for like 4 or 5 weeks while I was in Australia, and it got to this point where I was just like, I can't mix it anymore. It's just like, it's pissing me off to look at, and it's like music is not fun anymore at this point. But I was like, it has to be done. Like I can't. I'm listening to it next to other things, and I'm like, oh, it's okay. Like, I don't know, how is it? It's probably okay. And then I put it out, like I didn't listen to it for like 3 weeks, and then I released it, and then I listened to it again for the first time like last, I don't know, couple of days ago, and it's fine. Like all the shit that I was like hearing in it was just like, I don't know, I don't hear it now, you know? It's just, when you get overly obsessive about shit, it can kind of like fuck you up a little bit, I think.
And I also think that you should, find really specific people whose ears you trust to like go over your stuff too. Because if you really don't know what else to do, you can send it to someone who will really criticize you in the right way. I think the wrong thing to do is send it to people that will encourage you and say it's good no matter what. I mean, that does send off a lot of good happy chemicals when you get that in your Facebook Messenger. Like, really good track, dude, you're the best. I mean, that's great. I love sending my track. Sometimes Bill's that person. I love sending my track to someone who will like shit on a part of it, and tell me this is not sitting right, or I think you could do better here. And keep that friend circle really really close and close to you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I could use this. I don't know if you guys have talked about this. I just walked in. And this has probably been a question this is pretty rudimentary, but I just want to hear from you for my own sake as a producer. Would you say always convert your MIDI to audio, like immediately in the production process?
No, not always. I mean, there's definitely like stuff in here that's still in MIDI that would probably just stay in MIDI. I think convert it to audio if there's something about like the rhythm of it that you can't get right. That's when I would usually go, fuck it, I'll just make it audio, and then I can just like warp it or whatever.
But do you eventually put it to audio before you do like the full mix down? And,
no, not necessarily. It depends. If the synth doesn't have a re-triggering function, then yeah, probably. In the case of Serum, you can always set these oscillators to not be random with the phase, and always set the phase to be right at the initial zero crossing, which essentially makes it re-triggerable. But with some synths, they're just constantly oscillating, and every time you play it back, it's going to be slightly different because it's just going to start from a different start point all the time. In that case, I don't trust it for a final mixdown for sure, because I'm just like, but what if it like doesn't start right on the zero crossing when the kick hits and shit? Like you can just get it more perfect if it's in audio at that point. But most synths at this point have re-triggering options. So usually at the end, if stuff's not quite sitting right or whatever, I'll go and fix all of that up and then mix it from there. Yep.
So many questions, but that's okay.
All right.
But it also matters, how hard it's hitting your CPU load on the mix.
Yeah, that's another thing for sure.
Yeah, if your CPU load's cropping out, then you obviously want to start slimming down the session. All right, other question, yeah.
Hey, Bill, you may be as famous for the sheer number of collaborations you've done as you are just with your own career. And the one question I never really hear a lot about is, what does this look like when you're in a collaboration? Since it's sort of like you're tossing it over the wall, they toss it over the wall. How do you know it's working? What's working? And if, and what's the different judgment levels? I know it's a kind of a dimensional question, but
yeah.
What do good collabs look like for you, given how many number of people you're just dealing with all kinds of personalities and different creative personalities and what they think. What does that look like? And you two are a great example. You guys have been collabing a while.
Mm-hmm.
what does it even look like with this, the complexity of the music, and then what does that collaboration look like? What's the workflow look like?
Well, for starters, I just won't collaborate with someone if I don't like their music. So it's hard to get into I have before in the past, but usually they don't get finished because like I'll send something over, they'll just mess it up completely, and then I'll be like, I'm done, and then just like remove everything they did and finish it myself, or give it to somebody else to work on or something. So that happens like actually quite a lot, like 50% of the time probably. But I don't know, I just have a lot of friends like Ben who I really like as people and producers. You know, if you're going to be like hanging out with your friends anyway who write tunes, you might as well just write tunes with them. That's the way I look at it.
In the early stage of it feels like in the early stage of the work, when you're talking about workflow in a collab, the early stage would be the more, like, is it, you say, go work on this, or is it literally just hand it over and then just let them go all over the track? Is there
I reckon there has to be an idea there first. Like, for instance, Ben had this session, like, before this was a collab, right? And before it was a collab, it was an original, like, and then I was like, oh man, I got a cool idea for that when he was just showing me demos at his house, and then I edited it a bit, and he was like, oh yeah, I really like that, so then it became a collab, you know, and that's generally what happens most of the time. It's like, someone will have sometimes you'll sit down and be like, all right, we're gonna make a collab, and sometimes it doesn't work, and sometimes it's hard to get that initial idea out and stuff.
It's a lot like love and romance. Sometimes it just doesn't click, and you say, you know, I like you a lot, and it's just not working. But no, I really think that that in a lot of ways, it's when making music, you latch on to something that inspires you, and you kind of latch onto a flow state. If you're doing something that you don't really like, it's really a lot of effort to get it done unless you're getting paid a lot. I mean, that's like, you know, the kind of
becomes like emotional labor or something.
It becomes emotional labor. But if you're hanging out with a friend who you really admire, I'm learning a lot from Bill all the time, and like we're trading tricks, and also like it's easy. It's like sometimes I'll work on a little bit. I'll be, oh, I got an idea. Oh, great. I'm gonna go, you know, grab a beer, and you do your idea. And like if it just feels like you said, like hanging out and making neat stuff, then it's such a win because. Also, it comes down to trust too. Trust and personality. You don't want to work with someone who, I mean, especially with Bill, like, you know, I've seen him dead delete like 16 bars and be like, all right, I don't like this, let's do another thing. And you gotta be okay with that. But if you're gonna be someone that gets attached early to something that is half good, you know, rather than paving a way for something that could be super good, then you're gonna have trouble collaborating with some people. So I think a lot of the time and that actually is a really big theme I'd love to tell everybody. Don't get super attached to your music early on. You know, realize that like that we're all just we're trying to make a cool tune, a cool beat, and when you're collabing with someone, you're both trying to reach that goal, and always, you know. You're entering into a kind of a trust relationship with someone. If they want to check out a wormhole and go down it, you know, go for it. Like just entertain it for a second and see where it goes. You know.
Yeah, something you said about like not being afraid to delete stuff. What I've noticed when I work with like bigger artists who like, you know, deadmau5 and stuff like that, is they have no issue just like deleting shit and getting rid of it and just starting again and like creating new ideas out of stuff. And I think that's kind of why they're so big, is because they're such good songwriters. They just know when shit is not good. And I feel like one issue that a lot of like smaller or amateur producers have, and an issue that I definitely have had a lot in the past and still have, is it's really easy to put value on effort. Like if you've put a shitload of effort into something, you're like, oh man, this is so good, like just by proxy of knowing how much value I put into it. And then if you like sit it there, don't think about it for like a year and come back to it when you're at a point where you can't empathize with that effort that you put in anymore because you forget that you spent a 16-hour day on that track, then you'll listen to it and be like, this is fucking shit. And like, and I think like these bigger artists, they've sort of done that enough times where they're like, I know this is going to be one of those things in a year that I'll come back and listen to and just be like, this is garbage. So.
If you're an aspiring music producer and ready to evolve your sound, find out more about our San Francisco ground campus, online classes, and one-on-one mentorships at Pyramind.com.